Kia ora koutou, welcome to this Friday's QuakeCoRE Seminar. It's great to have you along on this lovely day here in Wellington. I've got my curtains closed, unfortunately, so I can't see the sun. But today we've got Bridget Sullivan-Taylor and also Julia Kotlarski, who's joining us, and they're going to be talking about digital resilience and the role of social media in the Whakaari eruption. So Bridget Sullivan-Taylor and Julia also work at Auckland University. Bridget should be a fairly familiar face to most of you. We've seen her at probably many conferences, and many of us have had chats and conversations with her. She's been working at Auckland for a few years, but prior to that, she was based in the UK for, I think it was about 20 years, Bridget, really looking at issues around uncertainty and organisational resilience. And since she's been based back here in New Zealand, she's been quite heavily involved in QuakeCoRE, and has had a number of projects under QuakeCoRE, including looking at issues around land use planning and earthquakes, looking at earthquake resilience in some of the provinces, and also this project looking at digital resilience and Twitter analyses from after the Whakaari eruption. And Julia has been, sorry, I'm pointing to the side of the screen because that's where Julia's sitting on my screen, but she's been helping Bridget out on this particular project. She's in the IS department at Auckland University, so she's been doing some work on the tweet analyses as well. So now I'm going to hand it over to Bridget. She might want to say a few words about herself and what she does, and she can get started on the presentation and swap with Julia as she needs to. So over to you, Bridget.
Okay, so I'm conscious of time. Julia Kotlarski has to go at 10:40, so I really want to ensure that she gets to be involved in the conversation. Many of you have heard me talk about this project several times as it's gone through several iterations along the way, and promised to share some findings with you. So without further ado, I'm going to move to share my screen as best I can. Now, this is a study focused around the White Island eruption in itself. And what we're doing with this piece of work is to look at how the Twitter social media behaviour started immediately after, and then to understand the basically the travel, where the tweets went, how quickly they moved, and who was sending them and retweeting them. So if you can imagine, there was a large data set to trawl through. So originally there was 180,000 tweets that we had to work through to understand how the communication moved straight after the news broke of the volcanic eruption. So we've titled this, How the World Understood the White Island Eruption, making sense of 180,000 tweets, a very huge data set. Those of you may remember the eruption was at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on the 9th of December 2019. It was quite a unique disaster, as there were less than 100 first-hand observations. So this is why it's interesting to follow the tweets from the people on board the boat, people who were nearby on land, people around New Zealand, and then how quickly this went offshore. So there were only 100 people who actually observed what happened. 47 people were on or near the island. 38 of them were from the cruise ship, and in fact one of our co-authors, Leila Bernicki, who is in the UK, was on board at that time. So we've got one of her first-hand recollections. And she also could tell us the role of Twitter for her and her partner who were on board the boat. That was the only source of information that they had. So due to the nature of the event being very quick, there was a lot of misinformation, and it spread really rapidly on Twitter, and we'll talk about that. So this leads to our main research question: how do different social media actors shape our understanding of an unfolding disaster. So this is really important from a range of perspectives, but including what we're interested in QuakeCoRE about government communications and how you manage getting heard in terms of your accurate information in the face of inaccurate bystander, or not even bystander information, just interested parties on Twitter. Why Twitter? Why did we decide to look at Twitter? Because when you look at the breakdown of information, I'm just moving my screen of pictures of everyone because I can't see that. A large portion of Twitter users regularly get their news from the site. So you can see here from research that was recently conducted in 2020 that the highest point of or accessing information is from Twitter, 60% of people, which is surprisingly even more than Facebook and all your usual suspects. So this is the percentage of each social media site users who regularly get news from these sources. So that's why we're looking at Twitter. And also it's instant, it's critical during a crisis and emergency, people depend on it. Twitter's motto is Twitter is what's happening and what people are talking about right now. There's over 180 million active users globally. That's 1/3 in America alone. And in New Zealand, we have over 300,000 active users. So this justifies why we use Twitter. And the great thing about Twitter is the data set remains available. The data from that time period that we're looking at is still there. We can go back and access it when we need to. So I'm going to maybe start talking about the data collection and then pass over to Julia so she can share insights as well. So we have an expert on the project, Sho Hill. He can't be here today, but he is a Twitter analyst expert. He's doing his PhD here in the business school, and last week he was down at Tech Week. Some of you might have met him when he was presenting at the Tech Week showcase. So the data was collected using custom-built software and Twitter's full archive. We have access to that. It's a premium search engine, and we are able to fully access that material. We have been only looking at data. When I mean only, it's still a vast amount of data, but the data period is from the 8th to the 22nd of December, basically 2 weeks. So the 8th, the event happened in New Zealand on the 9th, but because of date changes around the world, we've had to also go back and look at the 8th. So we're looking at a 2-week period. Iterative searches and cleaning resulted in 180,000 tweets globally just for this period. And then we've taken it down a step to look at the 55K original tweets, with the rest being retweets. So you can start to see here, the green boxes are the original tweets, the black boxes are the retweets, and along the bottom is the date. So the event occurred in New Zealand on the 9th, and it was really obviously peak of information on that day and the next day, and then it eventually goes down. We're interested in tracking who was tweeting, who were the actors, and then who were retweeting that kind of information. So it went up to about 60,000 tweets on the second day. The first day was about 40,000 retweets. So this is really interesting when we get into it. Julia, do you want to start now or the next slide? This is the production process.
I just wanted to add that if you look at the previous slide with the peak of tweets in the first 3 days. So we started from capturing tweets from 2 weeks, but looking at this graph, we realized that obviously we can't qualitatively analyze 2 weeks of tweets. So for qualitative analysis, we focused on first 3 days when we saw majority of information being tweeted, retweeted. So later on, when we talk about some qualitative analysis, we will be focusing on tweets and retweets from these first 3 days.
Yeah, so the data selection process is we reduce the data set to focus on the most important original tweets. So the entire data set, as I said, was 180,000. We selected all the original tweets to try and find out what was the first messages sent out. There was about 55,000 of them. And then we looked at it over time. So we added a time dimension. We selected all the tweets that occurred within 72 hours of the eruption, and we got down to 35,000. Then we looked at the tweets that were retweeted, and there was about 1,300 of those. And that's really what we're focusing on in the study now. That's how we've reduced the amount. The actor groups are on the left side, and some examples of who they are. So you would expect to see the emergency response agencies, examples police and civil defence. We've got media agencies in there. They really distributed the news very fast. Then we've got some active politicians. We have a lot of private individuals. We have some experts in the field of volcanology, scientists, doctors. Then we have a lot of influencers, 1,000 followers, individual news reporters. We have some government agencies. We have expert groups, organisations, and this is how we've organised them. But I just want to say in the last group, we have seen subsequently, because the data set remains the same, but some of the names can be tracked, and we've seen that some of the people who had tweeted originally, their accounts have been suspended. And it is a lot because of their crazy comments that they made were very inaccurate in this situation and others, and Twitter has banned them. So we've taken them out of the subset. So it's important to track who these people are to get a sense of credibility. You can see here that the media agencies were very active right from the start. There was almost 800 original tweets from media agencies, and the next big group were influencers, and then expert in the industry. Then we had some that I said were later suspended or deleted, and then it goes on down. You can see that second to bottom is government agencies, and fourth to bottom is your emergency agencies. And I think from the QuakeCoRE perspective, that might be perhaps a little bit concerning, that we're so far down that track, and that the influencers are so dominant, because some of these are really just individuals who will be going on to the next topic. They are not topic specialists or specific. They will then move on to something completely different. But you can see from this that the government messaging is perhaps down the minority compared to other groups. Then we looked at the retweets, so that's the original tweets, and then we looked at the retweets, again dominated by media agencies, private individuals and influencers. And so the government and official sources are not being retweeted as much as you would hope or expect. They are being dominated by these others. Sometimes the media, as you know, don't quite get things right, and private individuals have their own agendas. So again, from a QuakeCoRE perspective, I think these are very interesting findings indeed. Julia, do you want to add anything? I feel like I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, sure. I can talk a little bit about, so these deleted or suspended accounts, we also think that these might be bots, because again, given that me and Shahil, we both come from information systems background, we want also to check actually the nature of activity on those accounts, because nowadays it is quite easy to gain attention by creating a bot. So we do keep this category of deleted and suspended accounts, and we'll be looking into this more carefully to see whether, for example, media or any other sources have created bots, etc. So it's not just something which we can't explain. We actually have certain theory behind what this could be, and we'll be looking into this. Bridget, did you want me to talk about this slide, or?
No, you can move on. Just on the private individual, it was very clear when we looked at the data right from the beginning who was the dominant players in that space. And some people are just very Twitter active in general, and one person was actually there at the scene, so he provided a lot of information over time, which was useful. Okay, so
yeah, but this slide is actually very, very interesting in the sense that when we try to understand the extent to which each actor group influenced the activity on Twitter. So from these two graphs, which you have seen before, it seemed like media is dominating absolutely everything. But actually, if we compare number of original tweets from one actor group divided by number of total retweets, so what we see is that actually private individuals had the most impact on all the information which was spread over Twitter. So tweets by private individuals were retweeted 565 times. And if we look at media agencies, politicians or influencers, so their tweets were retweeted pretty much same amount of times. So it might be that obviously influencers created more original tweets, but in terms of how often their tweets were retweeted, etc., this is when we see that private individuals were most influential. Then emergency response agencies, which is good. Our emergency response is working well. But if we look at government and other categories, they're quite at the bottom of this list.
Then we look internationally, what happens. You can see here that New Zealand is the black line and Australia is the blue line. And you can see there's some activity there, number of original tweets in the low thousands. But if you see, what is very interesting here is that the yellow line is other, and within other, there's a lot of American tweets in here because there were a lot of Americans on the boat. So instantly you have a spike in activity from those on the board and families abroad looking to see more information, trying to understand what's going on. Interestingly, some of the tweets are quite inaccurate. There was a news channel in America that showed the video from the Auckland Museum, which was the fake scenario of a volcano eruption at Rangitoto causing a tidal wave to come over St Heliers. So that image was put on American TV. It's the wrong volcano in the wrong city. And it wasn't even a real scenario. So that was really interesting that they even got that information. Where they would get that, I don't know, because that's from the museum, but that was portrayed throughout America. So there was a lot of confusion initially as to where the volcano was, where the ship was with American tourists on it. So you can imagine a lot of that chat in the yellow was about that sort of thing, trying to figure out when and how and who was on board and so forth. We look at it over time, so there's a 72-hour trend. We look at those most popular tweets, who is talking. We want to understand what is the content and who is influencing the retweeting behaviour. So I want to come back to that slide later, but first I would like Julia to share with you some of these detailed hourly unfolding of the disaster tweets.
Yeah, so basically what we did, what you have seen so far is quantitative analysis just to show you extent of tweets or impact of different actors. What we started doing, and this is ongoing process, we are analyzing actually the content of tweets and we started doing it 1 hour at a time. And so what was really interesting, so I analyzed, it's a primary analysis, it's not completed, but it gives quite a good picture of what is going on in the first hour after eruption. So in the first hour, there were 10 original tweets and 480 retweets. Most tweets were by New Zealand-based media agencies, several agencies, and New Zealand-based emergency services, which was only actually Met Service at that particular hour, as well as some private individuals. Most retweeted tweet was by New Zealand Herald and Met Services. So what you see here is the yellow bubble is the actual tweet which was most retweeted by New Zealand Herald. it said breaking, an eruption is currently happening at White Island. And it was retweeted 189 times. While Met Service, they had two popular tweets during that hour, and you can see the time. So it's basically 9 minutes after the New Zealand Herald tweet, and another tweet is just another few minutes later. So one tweet by Met Services said, there has been an eruption on White Island and our aviation meteorologists have issued volcanic ash advisory for the area. That one was retweeted 70 times. And another one just a few minutes later, ash particles are similar enough in size to rain that we can see the White Island eruption on our radar. That one was retweeted 33 times. So what we actually are doing, we are making sense out of messages of those tweets. And obviously, starting from the first hour when there were only 10 original tweets, we can make a lot of sense out of those tweets and look into who and how retweeted them. Later on, it becomes a little bit more complicated because there were more tweets. But what we can see here is that media agency is obviously trying to put information in factual and dramatic way. Breaking, eruption is currently happening, so suspense. And obviously that was the most retweeted one. While when we look into what emergency services such as Met Service tweeted, they were quite informative and detailed. So they did not try to create panic or anything. Actually, they provided some information and then they came back with a second tweet with even more information. So basically they were sharing quite details, providing those Twitter users with some information which can be used in other ways than just to create panic. Second hour, Bridget, can we go to next one? So in the second hour, obviously, we see more original tweets. There were 46 original tweets, almost 3,000 retweets. Now, media agencies which joined the Twitter with spreading the news were majority non-New Zealand. So we can see that it started from purely New Zealand, emergency services, our own media, and second hour, we're already seeing some other media joining in. There were multiple New Zealand emergency services. So in the first hour, only Met Service. In the second hour, we had New Zealand Civil Defense. We had New Zealand Police also tweeting and retweeting. And if we look into New Zealand media, which was still tweeting quite a lot, New Zealand Herald, Radio New Zealand Staff, and a few others. So here you see again examples of New Zealand Herald tweet, which was most retweeted 317 times. Again, it's quite dramatic and less information. So there are fears for people who were on the island at the time of the eruption. Images from White Island, camera appear to show people, explosions happening shortly after. So it gives more to suspense and worry. And obviously what we see later on, that those tweets are being picked up and spread further and further and outside New Zealand. While when we look into tweets by emergency services, civil defense tweeted at 15:15, volcanic eruption is occurring at White Island and is hazardous in the immediate vicinity of the volcano. That one was retweeted 578 times. Another one by New Zealand Police, which is actually providing information where people should avoid going to. So again, we see this clearly the tendency of what kind of emotions or what kind of messages with drama and suspense we see from media and what we see from other emergency services in this case. And the last example is third hour. Next slide, please. So this is where we see the number of original tweets and retweets is growing. And this time, most tweets by worldwide media agencies agencies and land emergency services still continue to tweet quite a lot. But what we see later on is overall New Zealand emergency services, even though they are first one to tweet, obviously those tweets are not being retweeted a lot on the global picture, because, well, why would somebody in other countries would know which roads are closed? So what we see is that at the third hour, the most retweeted tweet was actually already by not New Zealand media, it was by BBC Breaking. It was retweeted 517 times. Volcano erupts in New Zealand with 100 people in the vicinity. Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says some are unaccounted for. So this is what the world is basically hearing. And this time the voice of New Zealand is already not heard that much. So other media agencies are being dominating the whole scene. While our emergency services continue providing informative, detailed information and some advice. So this tweet by Ministry of Health New Zealand saying those near Wakarai, White Island should follow New Zealand Civil Defence for updates and refer to our advice. So all kind of information and advice. And actually when we read all these tweets by New Zealand emergency agencies, they are very calm, they are reassuring, they are giving bits and bits of information to those who might be affected in one way or another. And just to show you one last tweet, which in the third hour we already see more groups. So we already see a politician like Simon Bridges sending a tweet, and again that one was retweeted only 23 times. And if I'm not mistaken, I think government agencies like Ministry of Health, first time tweets by government agencies and politicians we saw during only third hour, etc. So we continue with those analyses, but this is just to give you a feel how we approach this. We look into what were the nature of messages, how often they were retweeted, how influential they were hour by hour. What we believe that probably after hour 5 or 6, we might stop seeing such a distinct difference between who is tweeting and retweeting and what. So what we decided in terms of our analysis approach, so even though we are focusing on 72 hours, we start hour by hour, but when we see that not much is changing, perhaps in hour 5 or hour 6, etc., we will start looking into larger blocks of hours. Basically, we will do temporal bracketing to look at whatever is next set of hours when we see similar pattern. Thank you.
So I think what we're seeing is that while private individuals get retweeted often is a concern, it also represents the reality that we're facing today. In periods of high uncertainty, people tend to retweet emotional tweets rather than the factual tweets. And so that might help to explain why we see such a high amount of media sensationalization tweets and individuals reporting things from the ground and observations and so forth. So we are now putting this into a mixed methodology approach because we want to collect data from Facebook to understand and compare the hourly influence of each actor. We want to continue with this research. There's more that we need to discover to help us explain the context of the tweets. And it highlights the importance of quickly engaging with social media as a disaster, as it is unfolding. We found here that there was a bit of lag with the government reporting and information coming through. Yes, there was the initial declaration that there was, in fact, an explosion, but people wanted a lot more information really quickly. So you're leaving a vacuum there for the media or for other bystanders to really fill that gap. We found that while media agencies posted more content, individuals and emergency response agencies really did post the most important content during, but it wasn't retweeted quickly or enough across the piece. And this could possibly be due to the fact that these two actor groups posted frequently in the first 2 hours. And definitely the American agencies and some of the individual tweeters were talking to an American audience because there were so many Americans on the boat. But that also means that anything that happens in New Zealand is quickly on the international global stage, and if it's a negative situation where people are getting hurt and damaged and affected like this, that this is concerning, and therefore the government really needs to be stepping up with their agencies to try and get the messaging correct and right and out there as quick as possible. Julia, did you have anything you wanted to say?
Yeah, I just wanted to show one slide, which I don't know why we missed it in this presentation. So if I can get sharing rights, just 1 second. This slide will probably bring to life what Bridget just mentioned about role of individuals and how they were retweeted.
Can you share it, Julia?
Yeah, it's open on my computer. So if I can be given rights to share, I can share it.
Julia, are you the host? Can you do that?
I'm not sure, but you unshare yours, Bridget, and we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
You can just say multiple people can join.
I'm not the host. It might be, I don't know whether Amy can do anything or whether you can automatically just upload something.
Oh.
Which slide is it, Julia?
Oh, it is not in that slide deck, but it was in my slide.
I think you should be able to hit share screen and share yours.
The sharing option should be available to any participants.
Yes. Yeah, so this is the slide, which is the one where you see the most influential individual slides. So what I showed in hour 1, 2, and 3. So from hour 4 and from hour 6, I put on this slide just these most influential tweets by individuals. And so these both tweets are by somebody who has been at the event, at the eruption, and he made video, but it took some time until he got back to the boat when these tweets and video were released. But you can see that these are emotional tweets by kind of random individual, right, but first-hand observer. And you can see the messages in those tweets, and they are worrying, but they are also very emotional. And those tweets were picked up and retweeted. So first one was retweeted almost 30,000 times, and second one is 1,288 retweets. So this is basically can illustrate what Bridget was concluding with. All the dynamics of tweets, agencies, and those how specific individuals are being, their messages are being retweeted, etc. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Bridget and Julia. That's a really interesting presentation, and just really highlights like how quickly information moves following an event. Within 3 hours, it's all over the international media, and so really gives us pause for thought, I think, about you know, how agencies can maybe better contribute to providing information up front, so that some of that more directive action related detailed information that can kind of get out to people and kind of be retweeted as a priority. We've got some time for questions. I'll start off with one question while you're thinking of your questions, though I can see Caroline's got her hand up as well. So my question is, there was quite a lot of tweets from private individuals, my question is really around, do you have a kind of a feel for who those private individuals are? Because I know a lot of us are on Twitter and we probably represent ourselves as experts, I suppose. So do you know, can you kind of see a kind of a mix between, I guess, lay public and experts also tweeting? And is there usefulness in some of us, I guess, as independent individuals tweeting information that we know is accurate?
Actually, we have this category of experts individuals, and as well as private individual, like this person who was first-hand observer. So we spent quite a lot of time looking into actual details of people, and where we could see that somebody has some official connection to understanding something which has to do with emergencies, volcanology, etc. So we put those as individual experts, right? As when we saw that people are just retweeting all kinds of things, we put them into influencers. So obviously I would be curious, I guess maybe some of you made into this group of individual experts, or it can be interesting to look into that group particular, but we try to do as much and validate as possible when we were putting people into private individual in general. So, and from those we have this first-hand observer who we know that was first-hand observer, right? And then there are those whom we could put as experts.
Cool. Yeah. Good to know. So you can kind of sort of maybe unpack a bit of that as your analysis goes on.
Yeah.
Caroline, did you have a question for Hannah?
Yeah, thanks guys. Really interesting presentation, and I'm quite fascinated by this and how the spread of information sort of ripples out from an event like this. And I'm interested in this concept of influencers. We all know these are normally famous people or really trendy people who sell products online. How are they defined in terms of the number? Is there some sort of threshold for the number of followers they have? Is that what an influencer is defined as? Is there a figure, or how did you define it?
It was on the slide, Bridget. If you go back, sorry, if you go back to the slide, which explain different actors.
Sorry, I probably missed something.
No, but we also would like to validate. So if, for example, there will be disagreement. So this is where we, this one. So this is where you see, so basically private individuals versus influencers. So we looked into the actual accounts, and from that group, from in between, we could also identify some of those who are expert individuals, right? But generally speaking, influencer, they would be somebody who we see have a lot of followers, and they would normally be, some of them individual news reporters, but they're not associated with any particular group. I don't think we were talking about celebrities as such, but what we found is it was more making sense to put private individuals as government, like politicians.
So the fact that you have influencers with a news reporter kind of hat on as well is slightly confusing, because from my perspective, and I'm very much a lay person, I do have a Twitter account, but I would say an influencer is more of a person who hasn't got a role in the media. But that's, okay, so that's a little bit confusing. But the other thing was around the proportion of you were saying that the original emails from the scientists or from recognized research institutions, there were few of them, and they tended not to be retweeted or retweeted as often. Is that right? Because in the next couple of slides, I think you show that we're not tweeting very much as science organization expert groups. So we've got 24 there. But are they more likely to be retweeted or less likely to be retweeted?
They were less retweeted. So if you go to next, so original tweets we had from expert groups. So original, I think maybe next one, maybe the table actually would be, this one. So if we look into expert groups, so we had 24 original tweets, but this was within these 3 hours, 3 days, which we focused on, right? And out of them, so expert groups, they have been retweeted. Actually, no, when we look at number, so they were more influential than politicians and media agencies.
Yeah, see, that's what I sort of gathered from that table was actually we may not be tweeting very much, but we're overrepresented in terms of retweets.
Yeah, and this is one of those interesting things why we actually created this table, because I think these are the real numbers, the dividing total retweets by original tweets, and not just looking at graphs where media is just in the sky.
I guess the other big outcome of this research is it really shows how fake news spreads more than real news sometimes, like proper news or proper information, which is really scary, but that's just the reality of the world we live in, isn't it?
There was some really crazy tweets that we had to eliminate and get rid of. Really, not only scare people, but factually incorrect, Armageddon catastrophizing kind of types who were saying this is the end of the world, and this is just the start of the volcanoes starting to take off. yeah, so that's why we really had to, we've looked through lines and lines and lines and lines of Twitter data to see who is saying what, to really understand. Media agencies are quite easy because it's at, you know, hashtag CNN or whatever, but the influence, the individuals who are not experts are the ones who you have to really look to see who are their followers, what is the number of people listening to them, and also for us quite curiously is to try and understand who these characters are and why would anyone listen to these people, what is their basis of any credibility of any kind. That was the most interesting thing for us to try and unpack, because that's who you're competing with actually to get your messages out. So you know, it was quite interesting to try and understand why anyone follows these people in some situations. Yeah. And they don't have expert knowledge. So that's what you were saying before about these individuals. It is very, very interesting because they can blur the waters, they can dominate the airspace, but they can actually be factually incorrect. Spreading rumors.
Thanks, Bridget. I'm aware that Julia has to go at 10:40, so feel free to go if you need.
I will need to go. Thank you so much for arranging this presentation, Bridget, for inviting me to join. If there is anything which is useful in further comments, I would love to hear later on, and any further feedback, because our analysis are like working with this amount of tweets is really a lot of work, and anything which can steer us or flag what we're doing, maybe we're not looking at, would be great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Oh, thank you so much, Julia. And if anyone's got any extra questions for Bridget, I'm sure Bridget can stay on a bit longer, but thank you, Julia.
Yeah, yeah.
Any other further questions for Bridget? I think Carol's waving. If you just stop sharing your screen, Bridget, I can just see the thing.
Sure, stop share.
Yeah, okay. Everyone can see you.
Shohill said he had a lot of questions at Tech Week last week when he presented this to everyone. So
Carol, did you have a question?
Yeah. So Shohill did a great job at Tech Week last week, and I think it was probably the presentation that sort of stood out for most people because it was just so different to anything that anyone else was doing. So yeah, and thanks for a great presentation. So my comments about that slide you have of the single biggest retweet was that one on hour 4. About from the eyewitness person who said that they were on the boat, and it was interesting to me that was actually inaccurate. So they claimed that the last eruption was in 2001. In fact, it was 2016, and there's been 8 eruptions, since in the last 10 years. So it's quite plainly inaccurate. But I wonder if people have a sort of air of legitimacy if they're eyewitnesses, and I wonder if that means that people just sort of accept everything they say. Whereas, in fact, their eyewitness account is one thing, but when they try and sort of pass on other information, there's every chance it's going to be wrong. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, I think in the vacuum of information about facts like that, you do have these people who are heard more. Interestingly, our co-author was on the boat, and she said there was no information coming from the cruise ship itself about what was going on. And so they were sitting in their rooms actually using Twitter themselves to try and learn what was going on, because hours passed and there was still no information coming from the boat they were sitting on, and these were passengers from their boat, and it looked like actually the cruise ship didn't quite know who had gone on that excursion, so they were calling and asking, and is so and so here or there. So again, like any situation like this, there seems to be a bit of confusion going on, but interestingly, you could be sitting on a cruise ship in New Zealand reading and learning from American sources offshore, CNN and other media agencies, what might be happening here. And as you say, that could be factually completely incorrect. I think it raises a lot of questions here about how do you get credible information through if you're a visitor or a tourist in New Zealand in a situation? Where do you go? Because your Twitter streams might be, if you're an American, your American-based threads. So how do you get this information through to people who are on a foreign vessel in our waters?
Yeah, especially when official agencies often don't have definitive information to give out in the first hour or two. A lot of the information they give out is something's happened, wait and watch the space for more information. And so there's that balance of like, how much do you give out when you don't have anything to give versus all of this other information that might be misinformation that's going out.
Yes, I think that's absolutely true. I think that the court cases right now, the Royal Inquiry, will probably be using data like this as well, because they can track to some extent what some of the activity and the inaccuracies and what was occurring at the time, because they will be correlating information from witnesses who were on the island or taken off the island, a whole range of things. But I do think that this case and this situation is going to have repercussions for the tourism industry going forward, and policy about health and safety, communication, a whole range of things, because of the fact that there are going to be people held accountable for this situation in a multiple range of ways. There is information that suggests that the guides knew that there was different activity occurring on the island for the week before, and that information didn't seem to change behaviour or stop tours going on board. You know, I think there's a lot of questions here, and I think maybe social media will be used to recheck some of the facts and what actually was going on at the time. Because that's what it does. It's a repository of data. It doesn't go away. It just sits there. You can go back to it and check on things. But I think, Carol, you're absolutely right that there are huge information gaps here for a whole range of reasons that may not have been so much if it had been a scientific excursion. Those people would have known the history and the situation and the location, all sorts of things. This is simply tourists who were sold an excursion on a day without very much understanding of what they were getting themselves into. So yeah, I think that's another thing, another different lens on it. A worrying one, I think. Yeah, and I think there'll be questions about liability. I think apparently, again, just on the Twitter behaviour and social media, the American audiences and news channels are again following and tweeting the court cases, because the amount of Americans that were on the boat, vested interests, insurance, a whole range of things. So that's interesting again.
Whole nother layer of data. Any other further questions for Bridget? I'm just aware of the time and probably of the need to wrap up shortly, but yeah, anybody else got any questions?
Would be interested in any advice anyone might have of where these findings could perhaps be shared, like with what government agencies or who might be receptive to hear some of these messages. Any ideas on that would be helpful as well, and we're publishing it as well. Yeah. But please get in touch with us, really, we're so keen. This is a new frontier for many of us.
Cool. Alicia, did you have a question?
Yeah, it's not necessarily a question, more like a kind of a discussion. So Bridget, thank you very much for your great presentation. And I was wondering if Shoho told you about the Tech Week was pretty successful. Yeah, yes. Everybody was quite interested in his topic. So because coming from a communication background, and also we use social media a lot, like not only tweet and also Instagram and Facebook and something like that. So I was just wondering, in terms of why people are retweeting from personal influencers or media, first of all, probably because they have more followers. And second of all, indeed, if more human factors are considered in spreading the words and information, because it's more related to people's emotions and more human factors are considered, that's probably why people want to retweet that kind of information a little bit more than just cold stats or just facts, if that makes sense. That's my idea.
Yes, you absolutely. Yeah, in the first hour there was the facts, and then it started to become emotional when people realised there were people on the island, and then there were a lot of questions like, why were people on the island? Should there have been people on the island? How many people were on the island? You know, lots of emotional stuff started to come in then, absolutely. And then that just escalated from there with people's interpretations of that.
Yeah, so actually that depends on what is the goal of our message. So who we want our message to deliver to, what kind of target audiences. So that's something to do with what kind of information we want to spread to and in what way. Yeah,
Yes.
That's my idea.
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, it is interesting. Maybe we should be collaborating with celebrities and key influencers because they do seem to have a huge following. But yeah, you can quickly get messages out. Yeah, that's interesting finding. Thank you for organising Sholei's trip. He absolutely loved coming down and meeting all of you. He said it was fantastic. He said you were all so welcoming and everyone was so interested in the research. And today he's in Queenstown. He can't be here, but he wanted to say, please get in touch. And no, he was really, really so grateful for that opportunity. So thank you so much. And he's an amazing Twitter expert. If anyone needs help, talk to him.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you so much, Bridget, for spending some time, and to Julia as well, spending time talking to us about that project. I think we all got a lot out of it. It's really interesting just to kind of see the dynamics of kind of how that played out, and then kind of reflect, I suppose, on what it means for communications after future events as well. So yeah, really appreciate your time, and I'm sure you can, as Bridget said, and Julia said, just to get in touch with them if you kind of have any more questions or have any ideas or anything that you think you might be able to kind of have a good discussion about. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you everyone. Really, really grateful. Thank you. See you. Have a good weekend.